Coming up on Tech News Weekly, Jason Howell and I have a show for you. First, we talk to Sherr of CNET about the Apple event. It's AirTags, it's colorful iMacs, it's iPad Pros, and, well, so much more. Then I talk about a new therapy being tested with virtual reality. It's physical therapy. It's really inspiring. Then we talk to David Gehring of Distributedmedialab about Google's FLoC, what you need to know, if you should be worried about it, what it means for privacy, and so much more. A really interesting conversation before Jason Howell rounds us out with Google and the FCC. What's going on there? And teacher-recommended apps in the Play Store. Stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 180, recorded Thursday, April 22nd, 2021. This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. Like expired milk, 30% of your customers' data goes bad every year. That's money down the drain. Visit Melissa's developer portal for free access to data quality APIs, demos, and code samples. Freshen up your sour data today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. And by Command Line Heroes, a podcast that tells the epic true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, and open source rebels who are revolutionizing the technology landscape. Search for Command Line Heroes anywhere you listen to podcasts.
And by the Enterprise Tech 30. The Enterprise Tech 30 is a definitive list of the 30 most promising B2B startups as determined by over 100 venture capitalists and 20 corporate development teams. Visit enterprisetech30.com to see 2021's winners. Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly. This, of course, is the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I am Mikah Sargent.
And I'm Jason Howell. And boy, this is a week for you, Mikah, with the Apple event and everything. This is like a week that you live for.
I live for this week. Oh, man. Wow. I was even surprised at how I sounded as I said that. It was an exciting week for sure. Apple had its event on Tuesday. And at this event, Apple announced a slew of new products. It was interesting. The event was called Spring Loaded. And there, of course, are always kind of, what does it mean? Could it mean something? And as Leo Laporte and I were going into the event, he and I both kind of commented on that loaded to suggest that maybe there was going to be quite a bit packed into this conversation, this 1 hour event. And it was jam-packed. I am excited to say we are joined by Sherr today from CNET to talk about the Apple event. Welcome back to the show, Ian.
How you doing?
I am just great. How about you?
I'm doing okay. You know, the pollen in Maryland, as I was saying, is it's something else. There's yellow coats on cars at this point.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
I hate that.
And then we get the cicadas soon, so it's just fantastic.
Oh yeah, that's right. You do. Lucky.
Back where I'm from, where I went to university in Columbia, Missouri, we had an ice cream shop that made a bunch of quirky flavors. And when the cicadas came, they made a cicada ice cream for a while. But then the health department came in and said, we get what you're doing, but the problem is you have to order cicadas that are cleaned and, properly processed, and you can't just use cicadas that are here in Columbia. So they
are literally dropping off the trees.
Yeah, exactly. Let me just get that one, and we'll roll it into some ice cream. I never tried the cicada ice cream, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. We are here today to talk about not cicada ice cream, sadly, but Apple's event. And I want to actually kick things off with the way that Apple kicked things off, which was talking about the Apple Card. Apple had a little bit of, with the Apple Card, had a little bit of a a blip in the road when there were some complaints about how spouses might not be able to get a card or might not have similar credit ratings and things like that. And Apple announced at this event both sort of a joint account that you could have with your spouse and Apple Card Family. Could you talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah, essentially what'll happen is what a lot of credit cards do these days. You can have someone join into the card and they get some of the benefit of whatever spending you do on there. It helps people who are trying to establish their credit. And then I think probably one of the smarter things that Apple did was this whole family idea, where I can actually give, essentially a credit card to one of my kids who is an offshoot of my own credit card. And I can set spending limits and all sorts of other stuff. And obviously, this is meant to live inside of Apple's world. But I think that it's something that, the consumer-friendly part of Apple is bringing to the industry that we don't always get, right? I mean, even adding my spouse to my card in other cards, they'll charge me, or I have to go through 16,000 buttons just to get to say okay. And Apple wants to make it super easy. And I'm all for making things easier to do when it comes to dealing with your finances.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There wasn't, again, a whole lot on that, but I did find it interesting. They kind of led with that and quickly kind of addressed the issue there, sort of. But there was another thing that was announced. And here at Twit, we just recently launched a program called Club Twit, which is a way for our members to, the listeners out there, to support Twit directly. And so that is a subscription service that we've launched where you get ad-free shows and some other fun stuff like a Discord that we have. And along with that, Apple at its event announced that Apple Podcasts, the app, was going to be getting some updates, which any of us who run developer betas, as I do, were privy to that. But along with all of that was Apple Podcasts subscriptions. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what Apple is planning to do with its subscription service?
Yeah, they're thinking of something very similar to what you're doing and what a lot of people have ended up doing, right? It's kind of Patreon for podcasts, if you want to put it in a headline. And, I think what's interesting is that they're trying to take the App Store model and apply it to podcasts. And it's interesting, you think about it, iPod was what started all of this, right? Like podcasts were literally coming off of that. And Apple created one of the first directories of podcasts, and they've always been at the heart of it, even though they haven't really taken charge. So it's interesting to see them try and actually build a business around it. And also what I'm fascinated by is that if you want to join as a subscriber, just like in other places, you'll get access to subscriber maybe only posts, or maybe you get ad free and stuff like that, or it can just be freemium, right? And they you get maybe access to the Discord as you guys do. So there's a lot of different ways that Apple wants to make it available. One of the things that apparently they're not going to do, though, at least for the free ones, is they're not going to host the podcast, which is something that's always been a slight frustration. You have to host it yourself and get the software all working and all of that. But it is interesting to see Apple go down this road. What I'm really going to be watching for is if any real businesses build out of it. You may remember Gimlet, the very popular podcasting company that Spotify bought. One of the things we found out when, later on, but when they were being acquired, they were running out of money. And you would think they were one of the most high profile companies out there doing podcasts. So if they were struggling to make it work, I really wonder how the rest of the industry is doing.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. It'll be interesting. The next thing on the list is a color change, which again was a surprise to me, given that it just came out of nowhere for me. So Apple announced a purple iPhone 12, a new color to add to the list. I'm curious, Ian, as an Apple watcher and as a tech watcher, your thoughts on Apple announcing a new color of iPhone after the launch of the iPhone has taken place. What's the thought here? What's the goal here, do you think?
Apple's always kind of done something like this. You may remember the Product Red devices sometimes come out afterward, and they kind of create a juice in sales. And I think that what Apple is doing is we're at the 6-month mark, right, between iPhones. And so this is one way to get people's attention. Also, this colorful thing was something we saw across Apple. It's really funny, you think back to the 90s with the original iMacs, and they're all colorful. And then if you look at over the years, the iMacs get whiter and then silver and black and very sterile. And then suddenly on Tuesday, they're like, oh, we realize there's color again. And so I have a feeling that maybe they're trying to kind of give that color feeling throughout their product line. Although, of course, they've had color in a lot of their devices that are mobile devices, but not so much in their computers. So it's interesting.
Yes, it is entirely interesting. I think one of the things
someone pointed out to me, I have to say, someone pointed out to me that April 21st is the anniversary of Prince's passing. So purple.
It all just kind of works.
Although they didn't play any Prince music when they announced it, which I think was a missed opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm sure that one of those color wear companies is working on a Prince phone with the purple iPhone for sure. One of the things that had long been rumored and was announced at this event, I was unsure if Apple was going to end up announcing it at this event, but they did. For the longest time, we've all been calling them AirTags, thinking of them as a plural. But Apple announced it, as they often do, as AirTag. And then I guess you have multiple AirTag devices. But let's talk a little bit about AirTag and what that means in terms of the Apple's Find My network and what is unique about these versus some of the other tracker devices on the market.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that this AirTag thing falls into two buckets, right? One is the technology bucket, which is super cool. And then there's like the policy bucket that gets it's very muddy. So we'll start with looking at the cool end of it. One of the things I think has always been fascinating about these little devices that you can get from Tile, for example. I've had Tiles forever. There's Tracker, which is like the word tracker, but without the E. So it's like tracker. But the idea is that the Bluetooth devices talk to an app on your phone. And everyone else who has this Tile app or the tracker or whatever are able to help each other find stuff when it's lost. So, I have this little Tile device attached to my luggage and I'm in the airport. And suddenly I walk away from one of the lines without my luggage. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I push a button and it'll tell me, oh, it's actually over here. And oftentimes it's these little whisper networks of all the apps talking to each other. They don't even know that they're helping one another, but that's what they're doing. Apple took this idea and kind of supercharged it, as they often do. So the Find My network is built off of their Find My iPhone, Find My iPad, Find My Friends. Now you're going to find your stuff. And same idea. They've created this little kind of, I guess it's the size of a $50 or a silver dollar. I haven't held it yet, but that you can attach to anything. So again, to your bag, to your dog, and just like with all of these other devices, everyone's iPhones and iPads and Macs are helping find this stuff. So if my bike suddenly ends up across town, I'll be able to say, hey, if someone's iPhone finds it, they're going to just send me an alert. They don't even know they helped me. What Apple also did was that they made it so that it'll actually direct you to the device. So unlike Tile, where you have to kind of listen for the noise, this will actually have like an arrow and kind of, X marks the spot. And I think it's pretty nifty. Tile says that they had built one, but when we get into the policy conversation, they apparently had been nixed by Apple. And that's part of it, is that Apple's going up against all these other established companies, and there's a lot of sense of sharp elbows. And so that's creating a lot of drama as well.
On one hand, this is a boring product. On the other hand, when I think about the competitors that have the sharp elbows that you're talking about, their offerings are interesting. You know, Tracker is one of them. They actually used to be a sponsor on the Twit network, so I used them for quite a while. What I noticed, however, is that the network effect on those products is never large enough for it to really seem like it's working. It might be working, and you just never lose the product or whatever it is that it's tied to. But it never feels like it's working. And I think that maybe there's a difference here when a company like Apple does this. And also, from what I understand, when it's in that like SOS mode, it actually opens up to just total Bluetooth mode, and like Android devices can get in on the phone as well. Yeah. Do you think that that's going to make a big difference for this like product category, having Apple do what Apple does so well, taking something that already exists and making it work somehow?
So, you know, the thing I think that's going to be interesting is that, you know, one of the things Tile really doesn't like is that they have to abandon their app, and they really don't like that. But all the other companies that might want to build these things, it could get really interesting. Like, you know, imagine that I buy a piece of luggage when we need those again, and it has it built in already, right? That's where Apple may really truly shine.
Yes, that I agree. Any way for that huge network to work together and to have this kind of be a sort of secondary process of, oh, I've lost something, and it's all just right there. It's been interesting watching some of the early journalists who have gotten their hands on the tags kind of talk about how they work and show some of the tutorials for the actual finding process.
And I would be a failure if I didn't mention we have one at CNET. There's a video we have up of it.
Perfect. Yes. So you can go to CNET, folks, listening to watch that video for sure, because it's really interesting to see. I think we'll sort of blaze past the Apple TV. There was a new Apple TV announced. With it comes some a new Apple TV Siri remote with ClickPad, and it's a little bit redesigned to kind of address some of the problems that people have had with it in the past. And then it does high dynamic range with high frame rate. And but I think the big thing that we want to talk about to round things out are the iMac and the iPad Pro. Can we talk about the new iMac first? Because yes, colors, but also another M1 device.
Yeah, one of the things that we've all been kind of looking for is the sign of how the M1 devices are going to kind of play out, right? Apple switching away from Intel is such a huge thing. And when it switched away from IBM, right, you go back to 2005, it was pretty smooth. It was bumpy, but it was pretty smooth. And one of the things that really struggled with was that it took forever for Adobe to update Photoshop. Microsoft Office took like over a year. It was really frustrating. And Rosetta did its job, but it wasn't great. And this time around, Apple seems to really be on the ball. A lot of these apps are already updated. And so the reality is now we have this iMac, and it looks like, hey, this is actually a pretty nifty machine that I can trust is going to do everything it says it does. It's super thin, right? I mean, it's almost the size of a massive iPad at this point. And the other thing is that they did a lot of those kind of cute things that they did with the original iMacs, right? They have color coding everywhere, right? You've got matching keyboards and mice. You've got a power cord that is color matched along with it. It's even magnetic. So there's a lot of that type of stuff that was really interesting about how Apple went about this. And, I appreciate that they went away from the sterile feel to colors. And hopefully they'll keep doing that for a while.
I hope so as well. Some really pretty colors there. And I know that they tend to, with the Pro line, kind of go bland. And unfortunately, that's where I tend to focus my eyes, is on the Pro line. But it'd really be nice to see some of these colors come to the Pro lineup. Yes, and then let's round things out with the iPad Pro. So interestingly, the branding of the iPad Pro is inclusive of the M1 chip, which for folks who don't know, the M1 chip, of course, is the Apple's new Silicon 4 for its Mac lineup, but now it's come to the iPad Pro, which also means the inclusion of Thunderbolt. But this iPad Pro makes quite a few leaps, which is interesting given that the last upgrade for the iPad Pro was really, really minuscule, really kind of underwhelming. So what all was introduced with this new iPad Pro, and what can folks expect there?
Yeah, this is one of those things I'm looking forward to actually holding in my hands. The screen on it is one of the things Apple really spent a lot of time on. They switched to this technology called mini LED, which as a result allows them to have significantly better contrast and lighting and all sorts of other stuff. And so as a result, they say that this screen, particularly on the 12 inchers, right? The 10 inchers don't have as nice a screen, but the 12 inchers, they are going to, it's competitive with the Pro Display XDR they sell for thousands of dollars. And now it's in this little package of an iPad. I'm really fascinated to see whether that lives up to what they promise. I mean, it's Apple and screens. They rarely make a promise they can't keep on that. But it's really fascinating to see them do that. And with the M1 chip and bringing in Thunderbolt and going up to 2 terabytes of storage, it almost feels like we're at a point where that blurring line between an iPad and a Mac is starting to happen, which I am super excited about. Like my dream device is, I detach the screen and it's an iPad, and I put it back in the keyboard and it's a Mac. And now that this is possible because of the software all being the same, right? Now that the M1 can run iPad and iPhone software and vice versa, in theory, it would be really great to see something where they really kind of blur those lines in a way that Microsoft keeps trying with their Surface. So that's what I'm really interested in, is really what it says about the future. It seems like a super overpowered iPad for now, which I'm sure like, a couple of people editing like 8K video will love, but the rest of us, it's like way too much.
Yeah, I am right there with you on that one. Very excited to hold it in my hands, but also very kind of overwhelmed by all that it offers until we do get to a point where I think WWDC will prove out some of the reasons for this kind of high-powered machine. Ian Sherr, exactly. Ian Sherr, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show and here today to talk about Apple. Of course, folks can head to CNET to see your work, but if they want to follow you online, where can they go to do that?
It's super easy. It's my name anywhere you want. So it's IANSHERR. You'll find me pretty much on every one of those networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Discord. It's all over the place. I'm always the same username to make it easy.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To see you again. All right. Up next, if real life physical therapy doesn't work for you, what about VR physical therapy? I think we're going to see a lot more of this, and I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about this, Mikah. That's coming up next in Mikah's Story of the Week. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. If you've ever forgotten, I know I've forgotten to check the date on a carton of milk, you know what happens. It gets sour. It goes bad. Just like your customer data can go bad. In fact, up to 30% of customer data goes bad each and every year. And Melissa is here to make sure that your data stays accurate, stays current, so that you're always reaching the right customers. Their tools have helped businesses maintain fresh data for more than 35 years, and that's why over 10,000 businesses trust the address experts. With Melissa, you'll be able to validate existing customer data and find new customers so you can stop wasting time and stop wasting your money dealing with inaccurate customer data. It can be very costly in a number of different ways. So you can get accurate data that helps you get to know your customers even better. You can verify addresses, emails, phone numbers, names, all in real time with Melissa. Melissa's global address verification service verifies addresses for more than 240 countries and territories at the point of entry. So it happens in real time while you're typing in. Kind of like magic. If you're tired of having duplicate customer information in your database, Melissa has data matching where you can eliminate clutter and duplicates, which actually increases the accuracy of your database, definitely reduces postage costs, mailing costs, and other costs associated with that. You can get the information that completes your customer profiles better and more thoroughly. So adding consumer demographic information to your records, things like property data, marital status, social media handles, those are super valuable. Melissa's flexible deployment options offer different platforms to suit any preference, any business size or budget. You get flexible on-prem web service, secure FTP processing, software as a service delivery options. Basically, you can choose the best way to meet your unique business needs. And Melissa continually undergoes independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, to privacy and compliance requirements. So SOC 2, HIPAA, GDPR, all compliant. And Melissa is also supporting communities and qualifying essential workers during COVID-19. So you can see if your organization qualifies for 6 months of free service. All you got to do is apply online. So don't put up with sour customer contact data. You don't have to. Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's super easy to log on, sign up, and then just start playing around in the API sandbox, which is there all the time, 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free. All you have to do is go to melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. And we thank Melissa for their support of Tech News Weekly. All right. So we'll start with your story of the week here. What you got, Mikah?
Yeah, so this is an interesting story. We have heard in the past about virtual reality being used for things just like PTSD and some other psychological concerns to help alleviate those especially given the way that the more standard treatments work. Virtual reality can actually help to enhance those treatments and sort of build upon what we already knew about them. Same goes for sort of fear therapy, with helping folks overcome their fear, and lots of other things related to sort of psychological aspects. So for a while, there have been some studies out for VR and psychological therapies, but a new type of therapy that hadn't been considered so heavily in the past, that's kind of proving to be a useful thing for virtual reality, are physical things, including physical and occupational therapy. So one of the things that is important to understand is, for anybody who's done physical therapy, they're very aware of this. I have never, blessedly, and knock on wood, have had to go through physical therapy. But we as human beings, our more base brain, as some people would say, our lizard brain, is averse to pain. We are programmed to avoid it. We do not like to feel pain, and it takes a lot to overcome that. And so physical therapists, part of their job, part of their goal, is to help folks who are having to do this to eventually get to a good place, work through that pain and work through the desire to not continue with the physical therapy. So you can think about you've got an appointment in a given week, and some small thing comes up that could get in the way. And for some of us, it may be enough to go, I actually don't want to go do my physical therapy. And your lizard brain is saying, you don't want to do it because it hurts. And you you don't want to experience that. That's miserable. But your sort of higher brain is going, oh, I really need to do this other thing because it's very important. And so sometimes we may not even realize basically that the reason that we are avoiding it is because of a very base instinct to avoid pain. With virtual reality, it is actually helpful, as they're seeing, in two ways. It is helpful in increasing motivation to go through physical therapy, and it is helpful in increasing retention of and like proper technique. So your physical therapist, when you go to them, they teach you these different exercises, and oftentimes folks will forget when they get home exactly what they were supposed to do. Maybe they didn't take notes or what have you, or the paper that they get doesn't quite make sense about what they're supposed to be doing. With virtual reality, you can open up a program that walks you through the steps of your physical therapy. So that helps with the retention. But when it comes to motivation, there are some really cool programs being developed to help with getting folks kind of excited almost about physical therapy. The New York Times has a story, an anecdote in here about a person who, it says, Michael Heinrich was riding his motorcycle on the University of Michigan campus when a rotted tree fell on him and snapped his neck, causing him to permanently lose use of the lower half of his body. He, of course, was had to, try to overcome some of those things. And this is what he said about a game that he was able to play where he was soaring like an eagle to get through rings. So as he's, playing in virtual reality, he is perceiving the world as if he's an eagle, and his goal is to get through these rings. He says, from an emotional standpoint, coming off an injury where I lost the majority of the use of my body, VR pushed the boundaries of what I thought was possible. That's just incredible. When you are so viscerally faced with your limitations during physical therapy, that can be a very anti-motivation aspect of seeing that your leg is not moving how you want to, seeing that your arm is not moving how you need it to. But being in being in virtual reality where this person is taken on the form of a bird, and they are after a goal that is not just, can you get your knee to touch your chest for somebody who had like an ACL tear or something like that. You kind of detach from those goals that are more physical. And in doing so, it improves upon the experience overall. And there's more motivation there. There's more inspiration there. And there's more of a drive they're seeing to keep going. There was a program that they talked about, including one called Balloon Blast, which consisted of popping balloons with a virtual sword in each hand. In the background was how high their range of motion should be. So they were able to start to improve their range of motion using this game called Balloon Blast. They also found that the programs were geared to reduce stress, including a guided meditation where you walk through a forest, and it was helpful for this person's shoulder and their mental health because they were able to become more relaxed. XR Health is one of the companies that is working on this. It's actually, what's kind of interesting is that there are some insurance programs that do cover this to allow you to get a headset and to have some therapy appointments with an actual physical or occupational therapist as well, and for all of that to come through at once. So it's a fledgling field in terms of the programs that are out there that are just now kicking off, because one of the things that they're just now doing research on physical and occupational therapy with VR, given that for the longer time it has been seen as a psychological therapy use. So I think this is really fascinating, really inspiring, and I can, as a person who uses an Oculus Quest 2, I could totally see how someone could get use out of this, because there's a game, I think it's called Superhuman. Let me make sure that's what it's called. No, that's that email. I always do this. Superhuman is the email app, but there's a game for VR, and maybe somebody in the chat would know. But it is a really great exercise game, and it's near to what's called Superhuman, but I can't think of what it's called. Anyway, point is, playing that game and feeling the aches that I get on the day after I play that game. Supernatural. Yes, both of you hit it at the same time. Yeah, it was fantastic. Cool. So I very much, I can totally see how this works. And that's my story.
That's cool. Yeah, I have actually gone through physical therapy. Almost 20 years ago, I dislocated my left shoulder so badly that it required surgery. And so then a lot of PT after that. And yeah, it's no fun going through that situation, going through that experience, and in the kind of like the sterile kind of motivation that you have being like in front of a PT, and it's like, okay, now do this and it hurts and whatever. Like I can totally see how putting myself into a different reality, and instead of being focused on, all right, now, see that, mark that point on the wall and make sure and try your best to, power through raising your arm to, whatever this internal motivation that I'm like creating on the fly in this sterile environment, that's fine. It did the trick, but I can totally imagine being in a virtual world where there is a different type of objective. It kind of removes you from, I would imagine it might have the benefit of removing you from your body, so to speak, so that you aren't entirely focused on maybe the pain that you're feeling, and you're more focused on hitting that target or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, what does that do for our body from a movement perspective, allowing us to kind of hit a point that might have been less easy to get to if you weren't kind of out of your body, so to speak, in this virtual environment. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And we've already seen a lot of studies, and we've talked about on all of our shows here at Twit about how VR has been really good for other, like you said, Mikah, for other things that are maybe more from a cognitive perspective or from an empathy perspective, putting ourselves into a situation that allows us to better understand or better feel what it's like to be homeless, to be living a homeless on the streets, instead of reading about it and finding a feeling about that. There are ways to kind of use VR to transport ourselves into an experiential situation where we feel what it's like to do that. And so there's a lot of development that's happening with VR that, for the naysayers who look at VR and say, well, I just don't think, it hasn't taken off the way people expected it to. I think it's a passing fad. It's here to stay. It's just, I think we're starting to really sort of reach these points where we realize it's not just for games. It can be for all of these other uses. And just think about where that's going to be 10 years from now when these systems are integrated with other systems. Like, man, it's going to be really cool. Like, it's going to be powerful. So I love that. I think that's awesome.
Agreed.
Yeah. Cool stuff. Now I want to throw on my VR headset, but I'm not going to, not yet, because we've still got half the show to do here. And I'm really looking forward to this. Up next, Google's Federated Learning of Cohorts has seen a very sharp reaction from its critics. We're going to be talking with David Gehring about this. He knows all about FLoC, and we're going to chat with him about it. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Command Line Heroes. Command Line Heroes, it's a podcast, and actually it shares with you the epic true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, open source rebels who have largely and still are revolutionized the technology landscape. And season 7 is awesome. It's out now. And I think what I love so much about it is it really kind of tickles my nostalgia, the nostalgia part of me that goes back to 1995 when really, that was the start of the .com boom. I remember 95 well, when everything was taken off, and we weren't really quite sure as just general users who were just starting to use this technology what it was, and we certainly didn't know what it meant for the future. And as we can see now, looking backwards, wow, I mean, it's completely transformed everything. But it took a lot of things to come together at that time for the internet to actually succeed, and that's what Season 7 of Command Line Heroes is all about. Meet the internet class of 95. Before you could even hop onto GoDaddy and just grab a domain name, it's super easy now. There was a woman you'd have to call. Her name was Elizabeth Jake Feinler. She was the keeper of all domains. And episode 1 of the season features a conversation with her And, she's now in her 90s, just fascinating stuff, how she managed the internet, how her team needed to create the DNS, which is such a backbone for everything that we do online. 95 was the year that ISPs became the dominant gateway to the information superhighway. But how'd we go from ARPANET all the way to that? Well, it turns out none of it would have happened without a team of engineers at the University of Michigan and a network they built called the NSFNet. Or is it called NSFNet? I don't know. You're going to have to listen to find out. And web design, that took a while to become a career. Got a big boost in 95, and web design has transformed so much over the years. When the Batman Forever website launched to promote the movie, it showed people what was possible on the web. This episode features pioneers like Jeffrey Zeldman, the godfather of web design, who recounts the shift that changed the face of the web, literally the face of the web, everything that you see. Just so much stuff. You got to check it out for yourself. Obviously, 95 was a pivotal moment in the history of the internet when it went from this academic curiosity to just a global phenomenon. And Command Line Heroes is hosted by developer and podcaster Sherr Barak. And it's just really great. You got to check it out. Deep insight about the history behind technology, who has been part of it. And I guarantee you're going to listen to it and it's going to take you back. Even though you might not know the history of a lot of this stuff, it's going to take you back to what it felt like to be in the year 1995 exploring this stuff for the first time. And it really did just feel like magic. Now we take it for granted, but then it felt like magic. Check out all of the incredible stories from season 7 today. Search for Command Line Heroes anywhere you listen to podcasts. That's Command Line Heroes. You can download it today. And our huge thanks to Command Line Heroes for their support of Tech News Weekly and the Twit Network. Good stuff there. All right. Google announced just a few months back that it would be seeking to kind of replace the browser cookie with its own solution, something called FLoC. I'm sure you've heard of it. We talk about it on this network a whole lot. It's in the news a whole lot. Stands for Federated Learning of Cohorts. And though Google has kind of presented it as a pro-privacy way to track web activity, many companies, a lot of them very recently, and organizations, including the FF, have come out strongly against it. Well, our guest, David Gehring, is CEO of Distributedmedialab. He's an expert in the field of advertising online, and so by extension, the world of FLoC, the evolving world of FLoC. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, and I appreciate it. Jeff Jarvis was the one that put me in touch with you and put you on our radar, so we really do appreciate you carving out time to talk with us today.
Oh, yeah. No, my pleasure.
Right on. So let's, before we talk about anything, of complexity on this show, and we've got someone who can talk about it, as well as I'm sure you can. Let's start with the basics so that we can kind of get everybody on an even playing field. Explain the idea behind FLoC to begin with, what Google created and kind of what they expected it to solve specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the goal of FLoC is really, I think, best understood by kind of thinking about it from the perspective of a user, thinking about it from the perspective of a publisher, and then maybe thinking about it from the perspective of an advertiser. So I think what Google is trying to do with FLoC, as they discontinue recognizing cross-site cookies in 2022, how do they allow for the advertising economy on the open web to continue to flourish, which requires some degree of audience targetability. And so from a user's perspective, FLoCs are really designed to enable relevant ads while still protecting user privacy. And, the details of whether or not that goal is met is what's being argued about so much right now and in a lot of places. But that's basically the goal, is how to continue to deliver relevant ads but in a way that protects the user's privacy. And then from a publisher's perspective, FLoCs enable a higher ad rate by providing that kind of audience awareness to marketers. So from a publisher's perspective, it speaks to revenue potential. If they can't tell the marketers what kind of audience they've got coming to their site, the marketers and the advertisers are not going to be spending as much through programmatic channels to advertise on those sites. And then from an advertiser's perspective, FLoC's enabled that scaled audience acquisition or placement through those programmatic channels in a distributed way. And, so basically like an advertiser thinks I can buy a scaled audience across a whole lot of sites. I don't have to spend all of my money on Facebook to achieve that goal. I think from a user's perspective, it's relevancy and privacy. And from a publisher's perspective, it's revenue and user trust, speaking to the privacy. And from a marketer or advertiser's perspective, it's value in audience acquisition and engagement. Those are the goals as far as I understand. As the world wants more of a privacy-first solution in how we navigate the web, I think Google was really just trying to figure out how to do that and also at the same time enable an advertising economy to flourish.
Yeah. And man, those are some competing efforts there. Anytime you're talking about, we want more privacy. So then we've created this system of tracking that is different than the current system of tracking. I mean, and evidence of this is just the sheer fact that privacy advocates are just all over the board, man. The reaction to this is very negative in a lot of different directions. I think to certain, advocates of privacy, the idea of denying multiple advertisers kind of this interest data that we're so used to with cookies in favor of handing it all over to Google with FLoC kind of seems like same story, different day, or something along those lines. What is the actual, what is the benefit of the FLoC approach when compared to cookies when you take a look at them side by side?
Yeah, I mean, and I think I should start out by saying I'm not an engineer, and so I'm just understanding this from my perspective in terms of how the technologies that are available to us support the business models that we can leverage to support quality content on the web. But I don't know if it's accurate to say that we're handing over the data to Google in that how FLoCs are working. I think that there's a lot of I think pushback that seems to be, at least from my perspective, seems in many cases to be like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and not necessarily based on an accurate understanding of two things. One is how FLoCs work technically, but then also what is the status of the project in general. I think that it's Google just has such a hard position to play when, on the one hand, the world will complain when Google wants to launch something that's fully baked, and everyone complains about not having had a say in how it got baked. And then when Google says, here's something that's not fully baked, they get criticized for it being so unbaked. And so it's just, they've just achieved that status in the market of, a dominant position that then aligns the whole entire rest of the industry in opposition in a way that there's just no way that on top of the fact that Google, I think, doesn't necessarily do the best job of PR and marketing as they try and launch things. And that's always been the case. I think that, the engineering culture at Google, like when I worked there a while ago, this is a while back now, the engineering culture was beautiful and empowering in so many ways, but it didn't necessarily lend itself to effective marketing or definitely didn't lend itself to effective PR. And so I think sometimes Google trips over themselves when, with otherwise best of intentions, just doesn't recognize or internalize the gravity of their dominant position in the marketplace in a way that informs how they roll out new initiatives. And this one was really intended to be, from my understanding, really intended to be an open source project that was, to Google's credit, not fully baked when they started talking about it. And the Origin trial has gotten a lot of attention as well. And it makes a lot of sense the way they're pursuing it if you just look at the way they're pursuing it rather than who it is that is pursuing it. And so there's a lot of confusion in the market, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, that's also compounded with the fact that right now, like this moment in time, the last couple of years especially, but leading up till now, is just a crazy time when it comes to big tech, big tech companies like Google, like Facebook. They are so under the microscope right now to do everything right. And I think you're right. A company the size of Google and, Facebook definitely falls in this category as well. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. There's always going to be plenty of people on both sides pushing for that they're doing the right thing or they're doing the wrong thing, and right. That's just such a loud chorus at this point. It can be difficult for the everyday user to look at that and understand, for themselves what they're walking away with. FLoC, could be a prime example of that. Why are so many companies so reluctant to kind of buy in on Google's vision for FLoC? I mean, and including the EFF, the many browsers who are saying, well, we're not going, to participate in any way. We don't support it. I mean, there's just so much negativity around this. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think the negativity is, I think I think a lot of the negativity is just a function of the natural competition that's in the market. And I think that some of the negativity may be based on valid concerns about how FLoC ends up working. And so people are looking at the proposal as it stands today. And right. I think probably in a lot of cases, validly picking certain aspects of it and wanting to make sure that those things develop in a way that are privacy by design. And then I think there's also, I think the cynical or the realistic side of me, I guess, depending on your perspective, thinks that a lot of the opposition is actually a function of the ad tech industry not being interested in fundamental change. I mean, there is ad technology that just won't work without cookies. And then there is ad tech that will work without cookies, but they have a lot of work to do to make it work without cookies. And then there's the whole question of whether quality publishers should be relying on programmatic revenue to begin with. And so there's just a lot of competing interests that are, I think, leveraging the natural competitive opposition to Google in a way that is not necessarily on point, but is beside the point. So I think that one of the things that I from my outsider's observation has always seemed to be the case is that Google doesn't play politics very well either. It doesn't realize that a lot of the times they're getting attacked for one thing when the attackers actually got something else in mind as their agenda. And so that I've seen that play out so many times over the last few years. And so when it comes to, FLoC, it's just, we have to do something other than cookies for the sake of user privacy and for the sake of advertising, which is for the sake of quality publishing and quality content being freely available on an open web. But there are a lot of constituencies that really would prefer maintaining the status quo because they've got big businesses built on the status quo. And if you change the status quo in terms of the underlying technologies that enable your business, then who knows? It's just like, that's just a really unsettling place to be if your job is to run an ad tech company that really fundamentally depends on cookies to enable the business model that you've got.
Yeah, I don't even know where you go from there. I guess I do. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a kind of a visceral negative reaction to change that would force them to change how they do business. And anyone running a business would be hesitant to buy into anything like that without pushing back to some degree. There's also some confusion around, for users anyways, about this opt-in, opt-out condition. I know in the trial it's one, but when it goes live, it's opt-in. I think in the trial it's opt-out. Am I correct? And when it goes live, it's opt-in. Explain that a little bit, because that can definitely create some trouble for users buying in on it when they think it's one thing and actually it's going to be an entirely different thing.
Yeah, well, my understanding on the opt-out or the opt-in issue is purely a function of just kind of following different people on Twitter and seeing what they have to say about it. And so my understanding is that when FLoC is the intent is for when FLoC is actually live, it'll be an opt-in scenario for publishers, for websites. For the origin trial, it's an opt-out scenario, but that doesn't mean all websites in the world are by default opted in. It means that a small number of sites that I think have to have ads on them or are making API calls, those are opted in for the sake of the origin trial. But then when it comes time for launch, then websites will be opting in. Now they'll opt in by virtue of using FLoCs. And so if I've got like a local news website and I want to make some of my inventory available for sale through a programmatic exchange, and on the other side of that equation is an advertiser who's trying to target a particular FLoC through their agency or directly, then I'm going to want to let them know that I've got some of that FLoC coming to my website. And so that may opt them into it by virtue of them taking advantage of the revenue potential for being aware of what's the audience that's coming to their site. When it comes to users, I think users would be, it's from my perspective as a user, the way I understand FLoC working is that the data is not actually specific to me. Now, I have a lot of friends who will completely argue with me, and in some cases almost violently argue with me about that statement. And those are always fun conversations, but especially over beer. And so I'm waiting for COVID to end so we can start having these kinds of fights, but over alcohol, which makes them a lot more fun. Yes. Sometimes I feel like these things are amplified in a way that maybe they wouldn't if we were having it the old school way, like over beers. But the way I understand it is that there's nothing that is specifically identifying me that is being maintained by virtue of me being in a FLoC. It's the websites that I've visited are being part of a cohort, and that cohort is a number that doesn't even tell the marketer specifically what that cohort is about. And I know that there's a lot of discussion about whether or not it should. But from my perspective, thinking about it from a privacy by design, with a privacy by design structure as a user, just myself, I like the privacy aspects of it better than when I've got like Ghostery running on my browser and I see all the cookies that are getting dropped on every site that I visit. It freaks me out. Yeah. And so this is basically an alternative to that from my user's perspective. I appreciate. I haven't really gotten into the details of EFF's specific concerns, but that would be one organization that I would probably want to read more deeply about, like what are their concerns. But from my understanding of how it works, I don't know. I mean, I like getting relevant ads. If a user doesn't like getting relevant ads, they've probably got an ad blocker on their browser already. So this is all moot. So I don't know. There's a lot of things that I haven't bought yet that I looked at on Amazon. And I like to get the reminder that I'm thinking about buying that thing. Maybe not like incessantly, it's like maybe not incessantly, but
definitely not after you bought it.
Thinking about buying that. Yeah, exactly. Like I already bought those shoes. Fortunately for me, I buy the same shoes year after year after year. Like I never change the shoes that I wear. So it's actually helpful on that front, but
right on. Well, this is all super interesting stuff. I think at the end of the day, it's really about having a better, clear understanding of what the technology is and where we as users, as everybody, but especially as users, are getting our information as far as why it is good or why it is not good. At the end of the day, there's a lot of forces that would be affected by FLoC, and that's shaping the messaging that is coming from all these different directions. It can be hard. I can understand the hesitance for some just general users for this when you look at it through the lens of, instead of all these companies getting our data, this one company gets all our data, or gets it in air quotes, and I think that might be the misunderstanding that some people are approaching this with. And if that's the case, then heck no, I don't want any part of it.
And I think that is a misunderstanding, because Google isn't getting all the data. Google's ad tech has to interact with FLoCs the same as everyone else's ad tech. And the data is actually, someone may argue with that saying, well, Google makes Chrome. That's true. But what I mean is that it's not like this cohort awareness is being sent to a Google server and is being held in a Google server somewhere in a way that is unique to all other ad tech. Google's ad tech has to interact with the user's browser in the same way. There's an interesting philosophical discussion about the degree to which the browser should be perceived purely as an agent of the user rather than as a product of a company. And I think that that's a really interesting philosophical discussion and worth kind of diving into. And then the outcome of that discussion, or the position that you may hold on that philosophical discussion, actually then kind of rifles through the rest of the value chain of what a browser does for a user. But I don't think it's true to say that this is necessarily transferring all of that user data just to Google to handle singularly. That's not my understanding of how the technology works.
Awesome. Well, David, I really appreciate you carving out some time. I know we started a little bit late on your interview, so I apologize about that, but you've been very gracious to give us your time this morning. Thank you so much for talking with us. Distributedmedialab.com, is that where people can go, or do you want to point them to your Twitter? How do you want people to follow what you're doing?
Yeah, Distributedmedialab.com is our site. We're basically a content distribution platform for publishers. We're working primarily with a lot of local news publishers right now. Our mission really is to establish a viable economic framework to support quality original journalism on the web. And so we're doing that through enabling a different approach to content distribution that enables local publishers to be selling content marketing to local businesses, and national brands to be distributing their content across a large number of local publishers. So our goal is basically just to make sure that local journalism is a viable thing economically, and so they can do their job holding power accountable in local markets.
Important stuff. Absolutely. Especially right now. Well, David, thank you so much again for your time. And if we have some big FLoC developments down the line, I'll definitely reach out to you and bring you back. Appreciate your time.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Take care, David.
Thanks so much, David. Up next, it seems like antitrust hearings are all the rage, but what about misleading advertising? Google's in hot water for some Play Store labeling. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about the Enterprise Tech 30, which is bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. The Enterprise Tech 30 is a piece of seminal research developed by Wing Venture Capital in partnership with NASDAQ. The private enterprise tech is, well, it's an opaque sector. You have no idea which company is doing well or poorly due to caginess around growth and revenue, especially as sales cycles can be long and arduous. There are many ranked lists that feature startups or tech disruptors, but these lists are often dominated by consumer brands or more mature B2B startups everyone already knows. These lists create credibility and trust that a company featured will deliver a real, tangible outcome. However, this is often not the case, as the way many of these lists are produced is by lobbying or pay-to-play methods and are subject to bias based on how much hype a company can generate. The Enterprise Tech 30 brings to light the enterprise startups who have the most potential to tectonically shift how enterprises operate for the better. Awardees to the ET30 are on a fast track of growth and to change how business is done and are expected to be future IPOs and multi-billion-dollar exits. It is not possible to lobby your way onto the ET30. In fact, you can only be selected and become a part of an elite community. The Enterprise Tech 30 focuses on companies with potential at all stages of maturity rather than only showcasing companies with mature businesses and undeniable traction. The ET30 should be considered a buying guide for enterprise executives seeking to bring more validated and credible digital innovation into their organizations. Enterprise tech founders should see inclusion as the highest endorsement of their current and future success. Founders that aspire to build publicly traded companies should see inclusion as a watershed moment in their founder's journey. Tech execs and high-performance operators will use the list to help guide their decisions on what companies to join. The 2021 edition of the Enterprise Tech 30 brought to you by Wing Venture Capital and NASDAQ. It just launched. So you can head over to enterprisetech30.com to see who made this year's list. That's enterprisetech30.com. We thank the ET30, Wing, and NASDAQ for their support of Tech News Weekly. All right, Jason Howell, tell me about your story of the week.
All right. Well, this caught my attention. Actually, Megan Maroney, previous host of Tech News Weekly, forwarded this link to me and read it and thought it was kind of interesting. It's actually from a few weeks ago, but still it kind of got my mind going. And with the stories of the week, I kind of sometimes feel like that's more important than, no, it came out today. So I thought we could talk about it a little bit. Google is being taken to task right now by the FCC for a section of its Play Store for Android, that's its App Store for Android, that showcases something that they call teacher-approved apps. And this is a section that was first launched last April, right smack dab at the start of the lockdown when everybody was, teaching their kids at home, us included here in the Howell household. Google promised when they launched this a kid-friendly section, right? Like these are apps that have been vetted by not only its own reviewers, but more than 200 teachers across the U.S. That was at launch. I don't know if they've expanded that since, that was a year ago, basically. I don't know if that's grown over time. Also, the apps had to meet Google's Designed for Families program, which essentially means they're satisfying government regulation around things like ad targeting, data collection, COPPA rules, all that kind of stuff. It also happens to limit the kinds of ads that can be shown to kids inside of ad-supported apps. So looking at it, by all accounts, it seems like Google appeared to do its best to kind of adhere to these rules, as well, bring in expert advisors so that anything that they might be missing, like it really seemed like they were crossing the T's and dotting the I's and all that kind of stuff. But let's face it, like getting it wrong on something like this is actually really bad. Like it carries steep consequences if children happen to be exposed to the wrong kinds of things in these apps when, especially when parents are told that these apps are designed for kids and teacher approved. That would be a bad thing. Well, so flash forward to now, the campaign for commercial-free childhood and the Center for Digital Democracy both said they plan to file a complaint with the FCC on how Google is promoting these apps to kids. And it ties into a report. There are actually a few reports, but one report specifically that I found mentioned that found that 67% of apps for kids ages 5 and under actually transmit ad tracking data. This totally, is kind of part and parcel to the previous interview with David. And like I said, it wasn't just that one report. There were a few other reports that they cited found similar results. So often there are apps that are targeted at kids. This is 5 and under, but you have to imagine 13 and under, which falls into the COPPA rules. COPPA, by the way, stands for Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And so you have to imagine that there's a whole lot of apps that are doing this, right? Mm-hmm. Alphabet, in light of this, recommitted to its goal of making sure that its youngest users are safe and protected when they're using the Play Store, and specifically when parents are installing apps that are suggested or recommended as designed for families and teacher approved, that sort of stuff. It just, reading through this kind of reminded me of, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, YouTube Kids launched. And that rollout was interesting because, like, while I appreciated, the fact that, it's just a reality that kids are drawn to YouTube, that parents use YouTube to babysit their kids sometimes. It's like, oh, well, I'll just put on this cartoon, whatever, put them down. So it was nice to have a YouTube Kids offering because it offered the benefits of YouTube while promising, at least mostly, to kind of give a vetted serving of YouTube content. So vetted meaning, the age appropriate content, reviewed by people, also, analyzed by AI, which we all know how effective that can be, / ineffective. Ultimately, the goal I felt was very admirable, and I was really interested in it. But at the end of the day, bad apples got through. You know, at the end of the day, it's probably bound to happen on any system like this to a certain degree. But when that happens with a product that's marketed to kids, those consequences are very severe and very bad for the reputation of the company, not to mention, you know, potentially the health of the child, depending on what the infraction is. So I don't know, like, I don't know that I've like found like a landing point on this other than to say it feels very reminiscent of that. It's unfortunate. I appreciate that Google created this because I do not think that the solution is to not try and find these kinds of products that work for kids, that work well. I don't think that that's the solution, but I think it speaks to the complexity of these systems. The fact that even Google running its own app store apparently has a hard time knowing, although I think they have systems in place to know this pretty well, hard time knowing whether certain apps are actually, transmitting user data to some degree. And if this app is marketed to kids, like that's not a good thing. Like Google needs to have that figured out. And apparently they don't. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It's a tough one, as you've pointed out. Like, it's kind of like on YouTube how a lot of people, there was that button that came up, or that toggle that came up at some point that said, is your stuff marketed to kids? And almost everyone I know just says no on that, because saying yes on that opens you up to so much potential trouble. And so given that, it's kind of hard. Like I wouldn't want to even, it makes me nervous just sort of being near someone who's having to wade through those waters. And I'm glad that it is as strict as it is and as difficult as it is, because it does mean that, you know, for once the system is really trying to protect and is kind of being mindful of that. But I don't envy anyone who has to sort of wade through those waters and potentially run into issues where they didn't realize they, you know, had done something wrong or made a mistake. It's a tough thing.
Yeah. It is a tough thing. So I'll be curious to see how this develops. Like if I, as a parent, if I was in the Play Store and I saw teacher approved, I would believe it. But like why would I question that? And kind of reading the due diligence that Google did in setting up this thing, this section, it really does seem like Google did a lot. Where they dropped the ball is using their technology to actually see, apparently, that these apps are doing these things. Because I think it's okay, I'm not a developer. I don't work at Google. I don't analyze these systems professionally or anything. But my understanding is it is not entirely difficult to see when an app is transmitting some of this data outward. There are apps that you can install on your phone that analyze the other apps on your phone and tell you whether it's doing as much based on the systems that it recognizes. So maybe it's not 100% foolproof. But if this is happening in the numbers that these reports say, like, what was it, 67% of the apps that they analyzed for kids 5 and under, that's a huge amount of apps. So I imagine there's some similarity there. You know, there's some systems that are recognizable in there. And apparently Google needs to do a better job of identifying them. So do that, Google.
There you go. Do it. Make it happen.
You mentioned it earlier, but I'm just going to repeat for anyone who may have missed, because you brought it up in the middle of the interview with Ian, Club Twit. Mikah mentioned it. If you haven't heard about it by now, you're hearing about it a lot on all of our shows this week. So just know that, like, this is not every day for the rest of your life. You're going to be hearing us beating the drum of Club Twit. But literally, we just launched it this week. So we're very excited about it. We want to make sure that everybody hears about it. Like Mikah said, members only, ad-free podcast service. So you get all of our podcasts completely ad-free. You get your own special feeds for everything that we have. You also get access to a bonus feed that no no one gets unless they're a part of the club, called Twit Plus. That's just extra content. Sometimes our pre and post shows are some of the most fun moments of some of our shows. We also plan to, do extra kind of discussions with the community, and we've got a whole lot of ideas that are going to end up in Twit Plus. So that's an extra feed, and then you get access to the members only Discord. So all of that, $7 per month. And it's just pretty awesome. The feedback has been tremendous. Like, we're having such a good time. And it's just really awesome to see this kind of come to life after all of the work that had been done behind the scenes to make it happen. So twit.tv/clubtwit. And you can check it out for yourself. As for this show, Tech News Weekly publishes... Excellent. We publish every Thursday at twit.tv/TNW. That's where you can go to subscribe to the show in audio and video formats.
And of course, you should give us a follow on social media so you can stay up to date with everything. We are at Twit on Twitter, at twit.tv on Instagram, at TwitTalk on TikTok. I am at Mikah Sargent, like Ian Sherr, on multiple social networks. I try to be on all of them, and at Mikah Sargent on all of them, so you can follow me there, or head to chihuahua.coffee, CHIHUAHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active. And of course, check out Smart Tech Today later today if you are into automation, smart home, all that jazz. We'll be doing that show later today. And then tomorrow, iOS Today with Rosemary Orchard. And if you missed the Apple event earlier this week, check out Twit News, as Leo and I covered the Apple event. What about you, Jason?
You've had a busy week.
It's been a very busy week.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. No need to plug, all about Android. That's my other show that I do here on Twit, but I'm also filling in and producing and doing lots of other things. So you'll see me sprinkled about. Big thanks to John Ashley at the studio for pushing buttons and editing the show and making it so that you can actually see it. Also, thanks to Burke, behind the scenes testing guests, doing a whole lot of work to support us doing this show. Couldn't do it without you guys, and couldn't do it without you. For without you, we would have no one watching and listening to Tech News Weekly. We'll see y'all next week. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am Ant Pruitt, and I want to tell you about my show, Hands-On Photography, here on Twit TV. Each and every week, Thursday that is, I like to sit down and share with you the best tips and tricks that are going to help make you a better photographer. And it's not always about Photoshop. It's not always about just having the biggest and baddest and bestest camera. It can be the simplest of things, like leave your eye open when you're looking through the viewfinder. All of these simple tips can really help step your photography game up. So subscribe to the show today. That's twit.tv/hop. And I look forward to talking to you soon.